While serving as an intern at the U.S. Mission to the United Nations, I discovered that the UN had a long-standing yoga club. Being a student and teacher of yoga for over a decade, I became very curious and wanted to know more about yoga's history at the UN. I developed a burning desire to wrap my brain around how yoga is changing the world. So I thought, what a perfect place to start, at the United Nations, to interview the head of the UN Yoga Club, Mr. Jermaine Bravo. And as fate saw to it, Milpish be white. They shared their stories with me so I could bring this video to you.
So as far as I know, yoga activities began in the United Nations around the mid-60s. And yoga was considered a sort of recreation activity. And little by little, well, that acquired more people, and they decided to establish something called, in the 70s, the Yoga Society. One of the teachers was a person affiliated to the movement of Siri Chinmoy. Siri Chinmoy is a very special character. He's an Indian philosopher and yoga guru who came to the US more or less in the early 60s, and he established his community in Queens. Around that time, when he created his community, he was successful in recruiting some UN staff members, mainly women. And that was a sort of, to our eyes, a sort of religious community. Something that was producing some controversy was the fact that these ladies gave their salary to the community, and they received in exchange pocket money for transportation and their lunch, and they were wearing a sari. So it was very funny to see a very blondie, blue eyes girl with a beautiful Indian sari, and they were part of the Siri Chinmoy.
All right. Do I look okay?
You look fabulous.
Thank you. So I'm Neil Pushby White. I'm with the United Nations Population Fund, and for the last 3 decades I was a student of, and still am, a student of Sri Chinmoy, who passed away in 2007. I met him actually at the United Nations. He had been invited by the Secretary General U Thant to give meditations for the delegates and staff. And a friend took me to a meditation there at the Dag Hammarskjöld Auditorium. So that was where I first saw him. That was in 1977, and I became his student in 1978.
They had a very strong connection between them, and little by little they began to organize a series of meetings to do meditation, and Siri Chinmoy was coming. Those meetings were successful because they included some members of the diplomatic community. But then the activities began to expand even more. Siri Chinmoy was very interested in sports, and he organized a series of marathons around the UN buildings. And even he organized some events in Central Park, and he used to call the UN team, and some people at the UN resented that he was using the logo UN. At this moment we have 60 clubs under the umbrella of what is called the United Nations Staff Recreation Council. And many of these clubs, they have one particular purpose: to be entertaining. In our case, we try to be a little bit beyond that, and to try to our teachers to explain that yoga is more than an entertainment, that yoga implies a total transformation of ourselves. And if we are able to transform ourselves, we can transform our environment, we can find a new meaning to our work, and we can practice yoga beyond the mat.
At the United Nations Population Fund, a couple of years ago, the Division for Human Resources wanted to offer something to their staff, and they asked if I would give like a little meditation session once a week. So I've started and I've been doing that. People, you know, it's a time out for people. It's a time for all of us to reflect and, you know, focus inwardly for a few minutes. We just meditate on a candle, we do some breathing exercises, but the main thing, I guess, the main benefit that I personally feel is that it's a time for all of us to look inward. We're all pulled in so many directions by email and computer and, you know, Skype, everything. It's just pulling us all the time. So this is a few moments for us to just focus on the essential.
So because of that, we have been trying to do advocacy, not only for yoga, but also of UN values among the yoga community. So we decided to establish or to create a newsletter. In the newsletter, we try to present what is yoga about and how the yoga values and the yoga practice is related to many of the UN values and principles. And as I was mentioning to you, we try to give some tips how to do yoga on a daily basis. One of the largest operations of the United Nations is peacekeeping. And in southern Lebanon, we have a large contingent of soldiers, and we discovered that some of them were teaching yoga in the public school. We contact them and we received some pictures, and we wrote a newsletter about that. And we tried to explain how, which is a very important point in yoga, because yoga people, they are so much in love about the concept of peace and ahimsa, that translates no harm, that to have a weapon, to have a military uniform, that doesn't go well with the yoga philosophy. And here we had a group of soldiers teaching yoga. So we were reminding our readers about the Bhagavad Gita and the dialogue between Lord Krishna and Arjuna. How to maintain that balance between violence and your task of having a weapon in your hand. Then we devoted another important newsletter to explain what is going on with the new advances in science, particularly neuroscience. Everything that we know today about the brain and the mind is very, very different from what we knew 20 years ago. And it's very fascinating to see that many of the things that in yoga we took for granted and we used to call the power of the mind, today in neuroscience we know that yes, the brain acts like a muscle. And like a muscle, it can be built, it can shrink, and all that depends on the practice. People tell us that to play violin or to play piano decently, you need 10,000 hours. And meditators, really professional meditators, they tell us, yes, you need something like 10,000 hours to produce anatomical changes in your neurons to be able to produce gamma waves. And gamma waves is exactly what we are producing when we are in deep, deep meditation. And that takes discipline, that takes determination and changing the life. So we are trying to transmit all these different ideas to our community. We have right now 570 members. Many of them are outside New York. We have a page in our internet at the United Nations that we call iSeek. And that iSeek is available everywhere in the world. And sometimes through the computer I receive an email from a place like Nairobi saying, we didn't know that we have a yoga club at the United Nations. And I just discovered that you posted how to do a daily practice. And I would like to receive more instructions how to perform better a yoga tree. I tried and I have not been successful. Someone else said, well, I have my mother who is having a terrible, terrible backache. And I discovered that you have something on that. Can you give me a little bit more tips? So I spent a lot of time in my computer corresponding to all these people around the world that discover yoga and our page through the United Nations Internet.
Anything that you can share with us about your feelings about how yoga is changing the world and in international relations?
Well, we always feel that the microcosm and the macrocosm are reflections of one another, so as above, so below. So we don't try to change the world, we try to change ourselves. And we try to become more humble, more loving, more giving, more generous, just offer more what we can. And we feel that, if we can change ourselves, if we can become better human beings, then as a result, the world becomes better.